Hi, it's Sage, and I'm here with One Piece chapter 902. You'll have to forgive me for my absence. I am in the process of moving house. But without further ado, we'll go on to the chapter. So this time we have another colour cover page, which is really interesting, and it's kind of like Whole Cake themed, with a couple of the crew members that aren't Whole Cake still involved. But onwards with the chapter. Now, this really feels like the end of Whole Cake. Our first page is reminding us back of Zoe, how we met Pedro, and Sanji learning of his death. And once we learn of his death, Carrot comes to comfort Sanji before abruptly breaking down herself and being unable to really comfort him, and him actually comforting her. And once this happens, we then go into Big Mum's song, Soul Pocus, Soul Pocus. I have no idea what the tune to this will be, but I can't wait to see this animated because I really enjoy the songs in One Piece and I really enjoy singing and things myself. So I'm excited for this one, especially I believe last week we had another song as well with the cake being risky. And that risk is kind of, for me, implied in this chapter. Now, as they are leaving the territory of Big Mum, the Straw Hats, Big Mum is back up and she is heading towards Cacao Island on a kind of froggy-shaped candy homie with Perospero. And we then see the Fishman pirates battling the Big Mum pirates and the Germa as well. And we see Jinbe, who stayed behind rather upsettingly, and I definitely wasn't so upset that Jinbe left. Definitely wasn't. No, I wasn't. I might have been a little bit miffed. But that's okay. And then from going on to see that, we see Pudding. Now, this is probably my favourite part of the chapter, is Pudding's reflection on her time with Sanji, her reflection on her emotions with Sanji, the feeling of bereavement almost she has for that relationship to be gone, because she does actually love Sanji. And she's breaking down, and there's this beautiful page where she goes in to kiss him. She takes out his cigarette. She goes in to kiss him. That's her last request. And then she removes that memory from him. And it's done with the film reel. And she's holding that film reel in her hand, and she's breaking down and she's crying, and I really appreciate Pudding as a character. I know a lot of people don't, but my thing with Pudding is she's a mixed up kiddie. Her mum has always told her how ugly she is, and the first person that's told her she's beautiful, she's meant to kill. And she just falls for him instead, and she goes through these drastic switches of personality because she's going in between what she's been told to behave as and how she thinks she's meant to act and how she actually feels. And that's why all of Pudding's stuff has been messed up. But now that Sanji's finally gone, she's just breaking down like Carrot was earlier, and has kept that memory for her and her only. Now that the Straw Hats have escaped the territory, the Germa is retreating. However, my other favourite part of this chapter is that confirmation with Katakuri that yes, it was a choice to fall on his back. That yes, he accepted defeat. That he no longer had the will to continue. That to him, his life was one big lie, and Brule knew. Brule, the one that had been hyping up the whole time, was well aware and knew him as a child, and says, well, that was all just an act for us. That was never who you were. And I think that's so important. And we find out that the scar is actually from the other children. It's from Katakuri has obviously beaten up his siblings for either making fun of his face or Brulee's. And then they've taken it out on the weaker, which is Brulee. And she says, it's fine, you know, it doesn't hurt at all, don't worry about it, it's not your fault. Like, people do odd things. And instead, Katakuri decides to take on a kind of new persona. And we actually see that not all of the ones there are his brothers and sisters. Some of them are just crewmates. So, because they're older and adults, and obviously Katakuri and the triplets are some of the oldest children of the Big Mum's children. So, they are prior crewmates of the Yonko Big Mum. And they are involved with the bullying that goes on of the children who aren't looking 100% human, which is interesting. Which to me suggests that the crew wasn't always as mixed as it is now. And I think that being a freak is something that's gradually become part of the kind of aesthetic of Totland. Like, what I say freak is the wrong word really, isn't it? Because the real freaks get kept in books. And the minks and other races that are normal are allowed to live in the archipelago. And Brulee starts to treat his wounds, and he says, you know, I think you'd be happy if you know that Straw Hat Luffy is escaping. I think you'll be happy if you know that. And Katakuri smirks and goes, yeah, no, because he's going to be Pirate King, and he's going to defeat Big Mum, and he's going to end the facade that is our group of pirates, and he's going to bring true peace to the Totland archipelago. And I think that's what Katakuri wants, is he wants actual peace on the Totland archipelago, compared to people having to give up their life to live there. And they continue with Big Mum's song until finally she, waves rushing behind her, comes to the part where the fishermen are still fighting, where Judge and the Gurma are starting to make their escape. And she says, life or death, which is very chilling. And we get a close-up of the different Gurma forces, and we get a close-up of Aladdin and Jinbe. I worry about Jinbe. So the last chapter is even if you die, don't die, which to me would suggest that Jinbe is not going to die, but maybe in a situation like Moscato, who was in the last chapter, who is still alive, maybe in a situation that his soul is taken. I perceive that as being a real possibility. Or at least some of his life force. And to be honest with you, if there was no consequence, I wouldn't enjoy that at all. Because there has to be consequence to going up against a Yonko. And I'm A-okay with part of the reason of us going back to Big Mum being to rescue the fisherman. Like, I'm okay with that. I just am. And another thing that I'm okay with is the possibility that Brook's shell is still in Big Mum's territory on a poneglyph. Because while everyone else seems to think there's enough room in the skull for a stack of poneglyph rubbings and his shell, I feel like Brook would leave behind the shell if he couldn't fit them in, and be like, you know, it's Sanji and Luffy, and as much as I want to, as much as meeting Laboon again is a big thing for Brooke, I think that meeting Laboon comes before being able to show him the shell. And although the shell is important to Brooke, is Luffy's goal superseding that for now? Because I feel like when he says, you know, nobody plans to fail, nobody plans to not succeed, I feel like that's hinting towards, you know, he's planning for the success of Luffy to become Pirate King. He's not planning for that to fail, because why would you plan failure? And then we get finally a flash to Zeph and the Baratide. And the Baratide looks like it has had some upgrades, may I just add. It is looking mighty good these times, the Barate or whatever. And there's this beautiful dual panel where Sanji serves his food and Zeph serves his food, and he says, "I will feed anyone who wishes to eat." The talking comes later. And it's just this real heartwarming end to the arc where we see that Sanji's character hasn't quintessentially changed, but it has developed. He's become like Zeph. He's become a part of that family, and he's let go of his past. And I think that's really important to have. You know, we had that ending with Judge. We had that, "I don't view you as my dad. You never gave me anything but life. And while life is a precious gift, even then, you made me feel like it wasn't worth it. And that's not okay, because it is worth it. And I do have a dad, and he's in the East Blue." Now, some people I've heard are concerned that this means that Big Mom might be coming after the Barate and Zeph, but I personally feel like Big Mom's rage is going to be on the Fishmen, and I feel like she already has enough to bring Luffy back, and I feel like Luffy is her prime target. So I'm not too concerned about Zeph and the Barate, but it was an amazing arc. There's no getting around it. The aesthetic, the fact that we've got music and things involved, the fact that we've got a Yonko, our first Yonko arc, the fact that Luffy doesn't beat her, Luffy doesn't go up against her and miraculously win, you know. It's a tough way just to get out of there. And like I was saying, you know, we've got these kind of military formations in the ocean of how we're escaping and how exactly these historical events happened. Because this is a historical event. And I think it's been good. And I think this is a good time to end it. And I think if we were to prolong this anymore, we would start being overly sick of Whole Cake. But as it stands, I would rate this chapter as a solid 8. It was very good. Really enjoyed it. And I would probably rate the arc overall about a 7. Because I like it. Big Mom is relatable to me. I find Pudding relatable. I find the Katakuri fight was very intense. It was one of the better fights we've had in years. I preferred it to Dressrosa by a long, long way. And actually, of the New World arcs, yeah, it was pretty good. I don't have the same complaints that I know a lot of people do have. But I think that's what's so good about this community, is because we can all come together and we can express ourselves and we can find out other people's opinions. And we have a format for that that's ready to go, and I think that's really great. And I can't wait for the community to be able to do the next arc all together and be involved in that myself. I think it's going to be a blast. So I think that about sums up my feelings of this arc and this chapter. It's been Sage. See you later.